Hey guys, welcome to the Scholar Online YouTube channel, the channel that is all about learning. Today I'm going to take it back to the basics because I get a lot of requests and questions in my channel about really basic things. And so today I'm going to try and break down a lot of what I do in this channel for beginners. So this course is geared towards beginners, people that are really new to coding, or people who have no coding experience at all, but specifically people that are interested in coding in Python. If you want to develop a career in OpenAI coding and you want to learn around how to use the API and you want to build exciting stuff, exactly the kind of stuff that I build on my channel, you need to know the Python basics. And I think people search for YouTube videos on building some ChatGPT application, and by the time you reach that video, it's very advanced and you're still struggling to understand the basics of coding, and it's difficult to follow along, and then the video becomes too much for you to handle that you end up not even watching the video. So today I want to take you to the basics so I can teach you the basics of Python programming and how we get from hello world to being able to build the kind of applications that we build on my channel, because ultimately I want to bring you to the level where you can build the kind of, if I go into my video list, I want you to be able to build this kind of applications that I've got here. And these are still very basic, like this is not even production level, but it's a start. If you can do this, then to get it to production level is very simple. And I'm going to show you where to start on my channel. First of all, let's get through the administrative stuff about my videos, okay? Like the video, smash that like button because it really helps my channel. It helps my videos show up to more and more people, all right? Leave a comment if there's something you don't understand. I really try to get through as many comments as I can. Sometimes it takes me 2 months to do it because I'm really actually a very busy person. But when I do get to it, I will address it and respond to it where applicable, all right? So like that video, leave your comment. Even if you don't get a response in the next 2 weeks, you will get it eventually, all right? Then I just want to show you how my channel is organized. So if you go to youtube.com/scholaronline, this link that is at the top here, I will try and link it in the description as well so that you can find it, but it's just really searching for my channel and going to my channel landing page. You can see at the top there is videos, shorts, all sorts of things that you can do. And these videos are organized according to the latest video. So the latest video is the one at the top, and so forth and so forth. Now, you might come here and you come across this ChatGPT application, for example, and you look at it and you think, like, how did you even, what is this virtual server? I got a question. What is this virtual machine, right? I've already done a whole lot of videos on my channel where I teach people how to buy a virtual machine, how to set a virtual machine up, the security around a virtual machine, how to deal with DigitalOcean and work with droplets. There's a lot of videos I've done on that. So if I had to cover the basics in every video that I make, my videos would all be 7 hours long, all right? So if you come across a video and you don't even understand how I set up the server in the first place, just go to the top there and search. For example, if you search virtual server, right, and you search there, you're gonna see I've got actually a lot of videos that I've already created around setting up a virtual server, right? And this one I think is one of the good ones, and it's like only 18 minutes long, right? So go through that video and watch it, at least to understand the basics and what is a virtual server, because everything I do, I build upon somebody that's already working on a virtual server, because I don't like to code on my personal machine. And if you become a long-time developer, you will understand, because there is so many things that I build on a daily basis. I wouldn't have enough space if I had to try and build all of them on my personal machine, and I can't even run them on my personal machine anyway, because I have to switch off my personal machine when I go to sleep. The virtual server is running 24/7. So if I run a code like a Twitter, scrapping bot or something like that, I need it to be running 24/7, and that is why I use things like virtual servers. So you need to understand it's the basics of programming. If you want to become a programmer, you're not going to be able to write code on something like a notebook online. I mean, those are just for teaching purposes. If you really want to become a coder and you want to build the kind of things we build on this channel, you are going to have to invest in a virtual machine, right? The cheapest one is $5 a month from DigitalOcean, and I think I've got the link in these videos of mine where I discuss especially this initial setup video with DigitalOcean. It's my least viewed video on my channel. I don't understand, but this channel is the most powerful video. This video is the most powerful video because it has all the basics of everything that I do is on this channel. How to set up the droplet, how to set up a firewall, how to use Nginx, and all those kind of things that you need to have your server set up before you can get started. So before you even do anything with this video, or after you've done this video, because this video is going to be very basic, go back and watch these 2 videos so you can understand how the structure of the videos on my channel is. Then only can you actually start watching some of the videos that I'm teaching about with how to build a Flask or even a Django application, because I think next week I'm going to get back and start working on Django, because a lot of people have been asking me to do the chatbot on Django with the user authentication, with the payment processing and all of that, and I'm going to cover that maybe in the next video tutorial, but you will need to have done the basics to get there, right? So I'm going to leave this open. Actually, I'm going to close this, and I'm going to also make this super easy by using ChatGPT to help you along, because I always get really basic questions in my chat box, things like this line of code doesn't work, and you know, it's as quick as Googling something, and sometimes I might sound rude when I say, well, just Google it. As a developer, you need to be a problem solver. This is the first lesson I learned as a developer, and I'm now teaching you the very basics of even your thinking, right? You can't be a developer that writes code and every time you get an error, you want to copy and paste your error and send it to your teacher. You will never learn how to code like that. Even my own developers that are in my company that work for me, I teach them that, all right? Whatever code you get, the fact that I've shown you this code, you can see I've shown you on video, it's working. If you're doing something and it doesn't work as it is on my video, you're missing something, right? Because I code step by step right in front of the camera. So if you're missing something, the first thing that you do is you take your error and you go online and you just paste it on the Google search. You are going to find so many results, and you go through them and you sift them, but oh, you're lazy to do that because you just want me to give you the solution. It doesn't work like that, okay? Developers, you have to go through your code, and if you don't understand it, you have to look for solutions. Nowadays, ChatGPT actually also does a lot of debugging. I've been using it for debugging, you know. If you've got an error, you can even paste your code on ChatGPT and ask it where the problem is, and it will find it for you. I've done that at least once or twice this week. So today I'm going to show you how to use ChatGPT as a coding assistant, specifically for learning how to develop, but even debugging and certain things, and helping you write code properly. Because this week, as I was using ChatGPT to code, there's sort of certain areas where ChatGPT wrote the code slightly differently from the way I would have written it. And I actually learned that the ChatGPT was more efficient than the way I did it. So I'm actually starting to even put my old code in it, not because I don't know how to do it, but because I'm realizing that ChatGPT is writing it in a more efficient way, or in a better way, or more professional way than I had written it before, right? So let's get started. We're going to use ChatGPT as our assistant. You can get ChatGPT on chat.openai.com. If you get there and you don't have an account, you can just create one account there, and then you can get to this page where I am right now. I'm not going to show you how to do that. I think that's very basic. And when you get there, there's a couple of models. You know, there's the legacy one, which is deprecating soon, so don't use that. This one is the basic one that everybody gets, right? And if you're paying for the ChatGPT Plus like me, you can get ChatGPT 4. Right, but I'm going to use 3.5 instead of 4. 4 is better with coding, but 4 has got a limit on how many messages you can send. And because I'm going to be teaching you guys this, and maybe you don't have 4, I want to sort of replicate the same responses you're going to be getting. So I'm going to be using the 3.5, which is the one everyone will have access to if you go to this website, okay? So today's tutorial, we are going to learn how to code from scratch using ChatGPT for beginners, right? And I'm also laying just the foundations. The reason why I'm doing this is I'm laying the foundations for guys coming to my channel, so that you can at least start with this video to learn the basics of Python programming before you attempt to watch some of my other more complex videos, okay? So we're going to start on a blank slate. If you look over here, I've created a folder called Python Basics. You can call it anything you want, and inside of that file there's absolutely nothing in there. It's basically blank. We're going to start coding from a blank slate, and I've got my virtual machine running as well. All right, I've got a here I don't know, I've given it a different name. I usually give it the same name, but I've given my folder the name coding. And if you ls in here, you will see there's nothing here. It's just a blank slate. I want to start everything from scratch. If you know the way that I work, I write my code inside of this Atom code editing tool, which you can download yourself as well from the internet. You can just Google download Atom. Developers have preferences. There's many different types of download Atom. Where is it not coming up? Download Atom for Mac. Let's try that. There you go, Atom for Mac. This is the one, I think. And if you're using a Windows machine, no, this is not the one. This is not Atom. This is a different one. Let's see. Is this not online anymore? Let's see. Atom code editor. Why is this difficult to find today? Unless if this has changed. Because this is a website that keeps coming up, but this is not where I used to download Atom. Unless if this website has changed completely. Because I don't want to take you to a fake website with I've done this before in my previous videos, and now I can't find the link via Google search. You know, Google, this is a thing that really irritates me about Google. Let's put it on ChatGPT. Can you please send me a link to download the Atom code editing tool for Mac machine? All right, there you go. This is ChatGPT. This is a thing. This is a problem I have with Google. You know, like, people think I'm a Google hater, right? But I'm not a Google hater. But I swear to you guys, okay, this is not even the right website. What link? What did I click on? This atom.io. Let's try that. Did atom.io website go down? Oh, okay, so it's no longer there. Downloads previous Atom blog. Why did they do that? Now, so you can download it from here. Okay, so you can come here and you can download a previous release of Atom. I didn't know this. But why can't I find this when I Google? You know, like, it's just ridiculous. This is the problem I have with Google. This is my own personal opinion, and I'm going to go a little bit and diverse. But when you search on Google, you don't find the right results. You're finding somebody that's got an advert or some scam website, and why can't you just find the Atom? All right, let's see this one, the Hackable editor. Okay, this is the archive page. All right. Oh, there you go. So it looks like you can download it from here. But if this doesn't work, you can use any code editing tool. Okay, so I didn't realize that Atom was no longer what it was before. You can use any code editing tool, but I'm showing you of how you can even use ChatGPT. So let's ask it, please recommend other code editors with their download links. All right, so the first thing is to get a code editor, and there's a couple of other ones. Okay, so there is Sublime Text and Visual Studio. Sublime Text, in my mind, is the best alternative if you can't get a hold of Atom. Okay, because I think they're no longer supporting Atom, and I've noticed it does have a bit of issues. So maybe I must move to Sublime Text. Okay, so you can see I got this link from ChatGPT, right? So this is perfect. Actually, use Sublime Text. Okay, so I'm also probably going to move and start upgrading my coding to Sublime Text, and it works exactly the same way as the way Atom works, and it's just ideal. And I like this way before. Or you can use, if you're like a Windows person, you can go for Visual Studio, but I don't like it. I don't like VS Code. I just don't like it. I don't like anything Windows personally. And otherwise, I've never tried this Notepad Plus. And this Atom.io obviously is no longer, you know, and then there's brackets, but I would recommend Sublime if you can't get a hold of any of these other ones. So now you're this developer and you're trying to get things done, you know, use ChatGPT to recommend you some of these things. And I'm showing you as I'm going along. So you need this code developer, this code editor. So let's say we've now downloaded it, we've installed it, we open it up. I've opened a blank file that is called main.py. Figure out how to do it. If you can't, you know, ask ChatGPT. All right. So now that you're at this stage, I'm going to take you through the video that is showing all the steps I'm going to cover in this tutorial today. And I don't know if I'll get through all of it today. If the tutorial gets a little bit long, I will maybe cut halfway and then we'll continue later on with another one. But I want to get through at least the basics, right? As a developer, when you are developing a code or you're building an application or whatever it is that you're building, these are the things that you need to understand, just very high level of how developing works. First of all, when you are coding, you write lines of code in a specific coding language, and then you provide these lines of code are then processed by the machine to, you know, to output your intent or what it is you intended to do when you wrote those lines of code. So it's a way of you communicating with the machine. It's a language of communicating with the machine. It's like, imagine I want to tell my child, please go to the shop and buy me a bottle of milk, but my child speaks Python, and Python is a language and I need to tell my child what I need them to do. So I'm going to write in a Python language, please go to the shop and buy a bottle of milk. I have to structure it in a certain way. Each and every language has its rules and syntax, what we call, of how to write specific instructions. So coding is basically instructions, but it goes from being able to say, please just go buy me a bottle of milk, to please go build an entire city, where the instructions are going to be layered one after the next in files and documents, because you are now doing something, a very complex task. So you can code. We're going to start, even in this tutorial, from coding very simple tasks, which are just a line of code here and there. So I can show you how you get started with very basic coding, all the way to very complex applications like an entire Django app, which has multiple apps, multiple functions, multiple programs, to understand how you go from one line of code to complex systems. Okay, so imagine giving an instruction to a child to just buy a bottle of milk, to giving an instruction to a project engineer to saying, go and build me a modern city, where now that project engineer has to do multiple things, employ, libraries, hire different engineers, different things to finally build your high level project, right? So I'm gonna show you how all of that works in this video. I'm not going to take you into into an experienced developer, but I'm going to teach you the basics, so at least you can get started. It took me, if you look at me today, there's a comment from last week. I'm not going through the comments. That's why I did this video today. There's a comment about, but Bertha, on your CV, because I did the video where I was teaching you how to do, how to read a PDF file, and I used my own CV for that. So somebody was paying attention and they commented, but on your CV it says you were an engineer, but how did you become a developer? Well, if you're watching this video, I was an engineer. That is what I studied at university. At university, I actually studied chemical engineering, process engineering over 25 years ago. And I decided, I worked as an engineer for a good 15 years, right? And one day I just woke up and I decided, I don't want to do that anymore. I'm going to do something else with my life, because I just hated the culture. And I didn't know I would be a developer. I actually started with Bitcoin, and I started with cryptocurrency, and I wanted to build a cryptocurrency exchange. At the time, I had no knowledge of how to write code. So I went and I hired some developers from India, and there was a company at the time that was selling white label cryptocurrency code, and I had some savings and I bought the white label code from them, and I actually started running a cryptocurrency exchange. I ran it for a couple of months, but I came across some issues. But to cut a long story short, I learned very early that I'm going to struggle trying to run somebody else's code, because number one, I'm completely dependent on them. Number two, when something goes wrong, I have to rely on them to come and fix it. Number three, I cannot edit it to adjust it as time goes on, because I kept on thinking, but if I could fix this here, if I could change that there, because I'm an engineer and my engineering mind was working. And eventually, the contract with that white label ended, and the project didn't go so well because of those kind of issues, right? And in the end, I sort of just made a decision. You know what? I'm gonna learn this thing. Like, how hard can it be, right? How hard can it be? But of course, I don't have 4 years to go back to university and go study a whole computer science course, right? Luckily, programming is one of those few industries that are available today where you can literally learn from scratch online. You could learn online, and that's how I did it, right? I started with YouTube, just like you guys. I started with YouTube. I actually have learned a lot of what I know from YouTube, right? But YouTube was never enough because YouTube was always fragmented. It had pieces here and there, and you had to figure out how to put the pieces together. So I would go for full courses on Udemy and things like that, where you start from scratch and you go through an entire course where you can sort of try and see the whole principles. And I learned a lot of my development from that. But my real learning, if I can tell you a secret today, was not Udemy and YouTube. Udemy and YouTube can get you so far, right? 60% of my learning was reverse engineering people's code. So there's a place called GitHub. And if you really have the time, I mean, I was working on this full time, so I had a lot of time. Go to GitHub. There's a place called GitHub. People, they just put code on GitHub. I've never seen anything like this in any other industry except programming. You can just go to GitHub and you can look for code for some. At the time, I was doing blockchain engineering, so you could find even Bitcoin code on GitHub, right? So I would look for code for a perfectly engineered web application. For let's say Django, for example, I want to learn Django. So I'd go and find code for a perfectly built Django application. And I would download that code and I'd put it on my machine and I would reverse engineer it. I would go into that code and I'll try to figure out how it works. So I would read the code line by line. I'll try to figure, oh, so this is the view function. Okay, so what does this do? Oh, this one I can see, oh, it renders something there, right? Oh, and this is and I went through working code and worked backwards to try and figure out how they built it to get it to where it was. And that was my best learning. And I started building real world-class applications from reverse engineered code, because then I would take that code and I was okay, well, and always look for the licensing, because that's very important. So you can't just take code unless if it is licensed, like with things like MIT, which means you can work from it, you can like, you know, what is the word? You can like download it, or you can like, you know, you can split the thing with a Git, where you can like, you know, get your own version of it and you can work with it and stuff like that. So reverse engineering code for me, that was the best lesson. But I'm digressing. So let's get back to. So I learned from scratch. What I'm trying to teach you, the whole backstory is about telling you that I learned from scratch. It took me maybe 5 years to get to where I am in terms of development, but within 2 years, I was doing enough coding that I could even sell my products to people within 2 years of learning. But obviously the 3 years perfected my art, and now I'm experienced. So that's the difference between, you know, in 2 years I was a developer that could develop decent code, but 5 years later I'm now an experienced developer that can develop world-class code. So there's a level of experience, of course, as you learn how things work over time, but within 2 years you're good to go. Right? So I need to teach you all these levels. So let's start setting up virtual environments. All right. So what are virtual environments? Especially with Python, you need to understand virtual environments. Virtual environments are the way Python code works is you can download Python on itself, right? And Python has got helpers, things like print, right? You type print and then Python knows that I need to print something on the machine. So I'll show you this, for example, right now. So let's write very simple code. Let's do some very simple mathematics. Oh, let's get ChatGPT to write us for us. Okay, so I'm gonna say, hey ChatGPT, I am learning how to code with Python. Can you give me simple lines of code I can run on my machine without external libraries? There's a reason why I'm using the word external libraries, but I just want to show you something. Obviously, when you came here and you were using this for the first time, you wouldn't know that, you know, what is an external library or so forth. But I'm starting from scratch now. line by line. Hello world, this is the most basic thing you can do on Python. All right, so I'm going to go over here and I'm going to type this print hello world. It's just one line of code, right? One line of code. And we can even do it on our virtual machine, or you can even like do this. If you do Python from the virtual server, it will now create a Python. This is a Python interactive thingy, and you can just print. You can type whatever it is you're trying to run over there. All right, so you just say Python on the virtual server. This is what I did. All right, and then you do that, and it does that. All right, and then it prints hello world. Let me actually exit out of this so I can actually start right from the beginning, because I think I already have a virtual thing running over here. So just ignore this for now, because I've already gone ahead of myself and you're not going to understand what's going on here. Okay, so I already had a virtual server running, so let me deactivate it and let me type Python. Right now, when you type Python and you don't have a virtual server, a virtual machine, a virtual environment running, what it does, it will tell you, do you want Python or Python 3? Because there's actually two types of Pythons that get installed in your virtual machine, and you're not sure. So you need to be very specific of which Python you're trying to run on this thing. And it makes no sense. Why does it install one? Why doesn't it just install the latest version? Because you would think when you're downloading a program, you want to always download the latest version. There are specific reasons for this, and this is because the different Python what you call them, the different Python not types, but like versions, let me call them versions. The different Python versions work differently. The syntax is even different. There's certain syntax which was originally in the original Python 2, and when they upgraded to Python 3, they changed the syntax, especially around string formatting. The syntax is completely different, but there's a lot of applications that have been built already on Python 2, right? So if I built my application 10 years ago, I used the Python 2. So if I install a virtual environment today, a new virtual machine today, and a Python 2 no longer exists because now they've upgraded to Python 3, my code is not going to work anymore. You understand? So what Python does is they actually let you still work with older versions so that you don't break the code. Because what you would need to do is go through all of that code and upgrade the entire syntax and even the libraries, because the libraries also would change, right? And it might be too much work because the code actually works, right? It's not like it's broken, it works. It's just that if you now upgrade to Python 3, it will break because the syntax is different. So this is why you will see in machines, there is both Python 2 and Python 3. Even in my own life, sometimes even with a new project, I will start with Python 2. I used to do it for a long time, right? But I don't recommend it for a new project. So now we know that there's Python 2 and Python 3. What you need to do is just to say Python 3, and then it will bring the interactive thingy where you can now run. Over here you can run Python code. You can do this even on, like over here, this is my machine, this is my MacBook. On MacBook you can also do the exact same thing. You can just do Python, because MacBook comes with Python 2, not Python 3. So with MacBook you can just write Python, and it will then it will bring forth this Python thing. It's pre-installed and pre-built into the MacBook. You don't have to install Python to get started. You just put Python on your command line, or on your, what we call this the terminal. They call it the terminal. You just, wherever you are, you just put Python, and then it will bring Python forth, and you can start running Python code. It's that simple. To start running Python code, you don't even have to install it, whether it's on a virtual machine or it's inside of your MacBook. But if you wanted to now run Python 3, because you can see this is Python 2.7 in MacBook, if you wanted to run Python 3, you would need to install Python 3 inside of MacBook. But now this is the virtual machine. Python 3 is installed in the virtual machine. So I'm going to work on the virtual machine, not on my MacBook. So I'm going to exit out of this. This is my MacBook. I'm going to clear this, and this is my virtual machine, and I'm going to run from over here. So let's go back and get this line, this line of code, and say print hello world. What is print? Print is like display something. Display something so I can see something, what is inside of that variable. So print hello world will just type for you hello world. All right. So if you said print and you didn't say print hello world and you wanted to print any other thing, you could put these two double exclamations. They represent a string. Okay. So if I pasted this in here, this is a string. So if I remove that in there, right, and I say hello world like that, right, I'm going to get an error because this is just a word. By default, if you put a word inside of Python, like if I say hello, right, if I say hello, by default this hello is a variable called hello, right? If I want to print hello and I copy this and I want to print hello, right, I will get an error, right? So if I say print, let me just remove all of this. If I say print hello, I will get an error. This is actually a name error. This is a type, the first error that you probably come across is called hello. It says the word hello is not defined, because if you just by default type in any word like that, it is not, it is a variable, right? And what is a variable? A variable is like a store of information. And with a lot of programming languages, when you define a variable, you'll have to there are different types of variable. You have strings and you have digits. Think about it. There's many other types, but the most common ones, let me just like type in there and say string, right? And then there is a let me call it like an integer. All right, an integer is like a number. Okay, so a string is like a words or a sentence, right? Think about strings as words or a sentence, and things about integers as numbers. There's many other types of variables, but let's just start as a start with these ones. They are strings and they are sentences. So this hello, because I've just written hello, Python doesn't know what hello is, and it says hello is not defined, right? If I wanted hello as a string, I would need to say hello is equals to hello. Now, if I put it inside of exclamation marks, and in Python, it doesn't matter, by the way, whether you do it like this, all right, with two exclamation marks, I mean, with two, yes, or you do it like that, it's exactly the same thing. You can even do it like this. You can even have three like that. And you can say hello this is hello, right? It will do the exact same thing. And what is the difference between this, right, this and this, right? Let's ask ChatGPT. Okay, what is the difference between these three things? Aha, there you go. All right, it explained very nicely. Single quotes, double quotes, and triple quotes. They all work for defining strings. All right. So single quotes can be used to represent a string literal. They are used to create a string with characters inside of them. All right. Double quotes can also be used to represent a string literal. They are used to create a string with characters inside of them. The string can contain a single quote instead of it without causing an error. All right. Oh, yes, yes. And then that. Okay, so the main difference between these two, this and that. So if you say, let's do it like this, hello is equals to hello, right? This is exactly the same thing as saying hello is equals to hello. These two things are exactly the same, but why would you want to use this as opposed to that? This one can contain another string inside of it. So you could say hello, right? My name is Bertha, right? What is your name? So I can include another string character inside of the double quote strings and you will not get an error, right? So I could say this, hello is that, and I won't get an error. But if I try to put this, right, inside of this string, of this single quote string, right, like that, hello, my name is Bertha, you see already that is in a different color. If you try to run this, you are going to get an error. invalid syntax because you can't put a string inside of a string. But if you wanted to put a string inside of a string, you could use this. And you could ask, why would you want to put a string inside of a string? Don't worry about it now. When you get into complex programming, especially when you're trying to define a lot of things, there's many instances where you have to put a string instead of a string. Sometimes it might not even be a string like that. It might be, hello, where is Bertha's cat? So where's Bertha's cat? You see Bertha's cat, this is a single quotation mark, right? So if you did it like this with a double string, you won't get an error, even though it has that Bertha's thing. And it's not really a string, but if you copied this inside of the single quotes, you'll get an error. Because this already ends that initial single quote and the rest of it is outside of the string. You see? So if you need to, you see, you get invalid syntax error. So if you need to either, personally, as a default, I always use double quotes. Because then I know I can use single quotes as I need. If I was defining something like Bertha's cat or whatever in there, I could do that and I'm not going to get an error and I don't have to remember to do that. I hardly ever use single quotes unless if it's like defining like singles, but in fact, I just default to this. So rather default to double quotes when you're using strings. Now, where do the triple quotes come in? Let's see what ChatGPT said. All right. Triple quotes can be used to represent a string literal that spans multiple lines. So if you want to have a multiple line, let's say you want to write an email, for example. All right. So let's say hello. We want to write a whole email. You can use 3 quotes if you're using multiple lines and you have new lines and you want all of those to be represented inside of your string. So you could say, good day. My name is Bertha. What is your name? Can you tell me about yourself? Now we are using triple quotes. What do triple quotes do? Triple quotes, thanks, allow you to have a new line. You can still do new lines on single quotes, by the way, and double quotes. But if you wanted to visualize what that hello is going to look like, you might want to do something like this, right? And you paste that in there and it will work without errors. But if you try to do this with single quotes like that, right, and you try to say hello is equals to this, this is an error. This is not going to work. But what you could do is you could still represent this in a different way. So you could use the new line functionality inside of string. So you could put that back there. Let's say you could put that back there, right? Good day. And then put that back there and use a new line. New line is like, it's a character you can put inside of a string to represent that you need to now go into the next line. All right. And you could do the same thing. Here we can put one new line. These are 2 new lines. All right. Let's put one new line. Right. And then let's put over here 2 new lines. And this is, by the way, backslashes. And then once you're done with that, you see, now you've got a double quote and you're using new lines and you could say hello, right? You're not going to get an error with this. It's going to work fine. But now let me put this at the top. Let me move this a little bit up so you can see what I'm doing here. Yeah, let's put this up here a little bit so you can see. So now you don't get an error with this. And if you wanted to now print hello, you see, it will print it with the new lines, the way you have the new lines. Okay, good day. There's 2 new lines. This is 1 new line over here, and these are 2 new lines. The first new line, think of a line as a break. It breaks from there, and then you put another new line, it breaks again, so it actually creates a space. So if you wanted to write a long letter with specifying specifically where the breaks are and everything like that, you want to use new lines, and that is, how you represent a string. So this is very, very basic Python. right? And you need to understand all these things to do the kind of things I'm doing. That's why I'm going back to the basics today. So this is really for beginners. If it's a little bit boring, we can see you guys next week, but I really think this is important to let the beginners understand what it is we are doing when they see what we're doing, because you need to know these basics before you get into writing complex code. Okay, now let's go back to our initial, and I'm also not just showing you the basics, I'm also showing you how to now use ChatGPT as a learning tool, right? So now let's go back and say, okay, cool, now we know how to print, right? And I've shown you how to print, I've shown you how to assign variables. Now another way of assigning variables is, let me say a number is equals to 1, right? This is remember I told you there's integers and there's strings. In Python, you don't have to tell Python whether this is a string or an integer. You can just define it and Python will know. If you say num is equals to 1, it will know that this is a number, it's an integer. So let's do that. Num is equals to 1. Let's print that. All right. I've assigned the variable 1, which is an integer, to num, right? And now if I want to know the type of data, you know, the type of what is inside, what is num, the type of number, it will tell me that it is a class integer. It's an integer, right? But hello, if I say type of hello, the type of hello is a string. Okay, so hello is a string because I defined it as a string, and num is an integer because I defined it as an integer, right? But I didn't have to tell Python that this is an integer. I just defined it. This is one of the simplicities of working with Python, which is not like the same in other programming languages. A lot of other programming languages I've worked with, you first of all have to say num is a string before you assign it, right? You have like 2 different lines before you can do something like num is equals to 1. But with Python, you can just do that. And then you can print num. You can print num, right? And it will print 1, right? Which is what you have assigned inside of num. So let me exit here, and then we're going to start from scratch. I'm going to clear this, and then we're going to start from scratch, because now I've shown you the very basics of variables and assigning variables, strings, double quotes, single quotes, and all of that. So you understand at least how to start defining variables inside of Python. Now, let's now do some sort of function over here, right? So you can see here they're assigning a to 5, a is equals to 5, b is equals to 10, sum of a plus b, and then we're printing it as a string. Okay, so let's copy this whole line of code. You can use that at the top there. Okay, so let's get rid of these and let's paste that in there and see what's going on. We are assigning the variable, the number 5 to the variable a. So a is your variable. It can store values, right? B is a variable. It can store values. By variable means it can also vary. It can be 10 today, it can be 11. You can even update what a is later on with time. Okay, so that is why we call it a variable. It can vary. It can be 5 today, it can be 10 tomorrow, it can be, but for now it's 5, and for now b is 10. And then now once you have variables like that, instead of saying 5 plus 10, you can even just say a plus b. Okay, and it will add 5 and 10 together. All right, so let's copy this inside of our Python. Let's clear. Let's type Python first. Clear Python 3. So let's paste that in there. Sum of a plus b. I didn't print anything, but the variable a is defined, the variable b is defined. Sum is already defined as a plus b. If I want to see what sum is, okay, I can just print it. So let's print sum. And you can see sum is 15. It added 5 and 10 together and gave you 15. Okay, this is just a very basics of assigning variables to whatever their values are, and then now doing some sort of mathematics or functioning within those variables. All right, very basic stuff. Okay, the next one, it does the exact same thing, but it's a more complicated function, but I'm not going to do that. And the next one is even a more complicated function. I've shown you the very, very basic function. Okay, so now without me, because otherwise we'll spend the whole day here, let me now ask, can you develop a simple function with a and b returning a calculated third variable. Okay, I just want to show you now writing functions now. Okay, so now calculate a and b, and c is equals to a plus b, and return c. So now I want to, because when we get into complex development, we can't always write our functions in lines like 1 plus 1 and then b and then do this, because we are not always on the command line. Over here we are running this function on the command line. We have defined a, we have defined b on the command line, and then if we want to get c, we have to print the sum of this to get c. But this is not always practical. We can't always run things in a command line. We actually want to program this ahead of time. This is why this is called programming. And then later on we want you to even put it inside of a file and then close that file, and then when we run the file, it will run the entire function that we run, because we're going to go from very simple things to complicated things which we will not be able to run line by line. So now I want to package this thing into a function, right? So instead of saying a is equals to this, b is equals to that, run this, I want to run this, put this into a function, and then run the function. And you can see this wrote it very nicely for me. So I'm going to actually copy this. Actually, you can just do that, copy code, right? And instead of printing that, right, I'm going to paste that. So now I've got a defined, I've got b defined, and I want to get a sum of a plus b, but I don't want to do it like that. I want to do it inside of a function. So to do a function, you always start with def, is defines, you're defining a function. And after you define a function, this function, with ChatGPT decided to call it calculate c, and then this calculate c takes in a and b as arguments into the function, or variables into the function, and then it does the same calculation, c is equals to a plus b, and then it returns c. Now these very basics lines of code is what the majority of our function program, Python programming does. And a lot of what we do is based on this, defining a function, doing something with a function, and returning something else, right? So that every time you run this defined function, it returns whatever the code that you have defined inside of the function. And in this specific case, the code in there is a plus b, which is whatever the a plus b that it takes in. This is very, very basic stuff, but you need to understand this, because a lot of what I do just takes this very basic feature and just makes it very much more complicated. But you have to understand the basics of it first. Now I want to use this thing, and I've now defined another thing. I could even call this sum. Let's stick to our original variables, which was sum. All right, I can even call this sum, right? And then sum, I call now this function that I've defined, right? And then I enter 2 and 3 in there as variables. So let's write this function. Let's copy this function, calculate c, and paste it in there, right? So for now, a and b, I'm gonna actually just a and b, I'm gonna leave it as defined like that, right? So now I'm gonna actually say calculate c, right? I'm gonna call the function of calculating c. I don't have to put it inside of a variable called sum. I can say calculate c is equals to, right, a slash b, just like that. Why can I say this? Because I've already defined a as 5 and I've already defined b as 10 in these lines of code. So if I do this, it will calculate c for me by adding them up together with a and b as they are. If I want, I can redefine the variable a. So I can say a is now equals to 200. And I can just leave c like that. And I can do a, calculate a is equals to ab, and it calculates to 10 because it updated a to 200 and it left b as 10. And then when I say calculate c by using a and b as defined, it now calculates 2 and 10. I can use this function by defining my own variables inside of the function as I call it, which is what ChatGPT did over here by putting in 2 and 3. So I can put in my own numbers. I don't have to use a and b as they are there. I can use I don't know, 45 and 10. So what it will do, it will add 45 and 10 together, as 45 will now be a and 10 will now be b, but it's not going to replace a and b as they are. A and b will remain. This is just the internal a and b inside of the function. Locally inside of this function, it will now add all of those together. But if I try to find what a is still 200 as I defined there. and B is still 10. If I want to change A and B, I actually have to now rename those functions. I need to say A is equals to something else. A is equals to 10. Only then, if I now say, if I call A, it will show that A is 10. You understand? Now I've added a new A and a new B over there, but it's just internally inside of the function, not globally defining that variable inside of our environment. You understand what's going on here? So spend time, you need to learn these principles. Oh, the last one is I can even like calculate by redefining a sum, right? And now sum is the addition of 2 and 3, but I've redefined what sum is. Now if I say sum over there, now sum is 5. All right, so just learn all of this and understand all of this. These are the basics, but what I wanted to show you here is how to run very basic Python functions that do not require a library. But what we need to do is we need libraries. All right, and this is where the virtual environment is. So I'm now taking you into now, we're getting into now understanding virtual environments. Right now, let's ask ChatGPT, give me a simple function that needs a third-party library. Right, let's ask ChatGPT for a function that needs a third-party library. All right, so now there's one over here. Let's copy this code. Let's paste it over there. You'll see over here we just started by defining A and we started by defining B, but now we need math. Right now we are importing math as a third-party library, right? And then we want to calculate the radius, and the area is math.pi. Let's say we want to get pi, this is pi r squared, and return the area. So this function, what does this function do? If you read through it, actually, if you understand maths, pi r squared is the area of a circle, right? And pi is a number that is like 3.4, whatever that has infinity. But let's say you don't always know what pi is, and you always want to get the right pi. You can use math to calculate pi for you and say math.pi. It gets you the pi value from math. So you can use pi in all your calculations, for example. But you don't have to know what it is. You're going to import it from this library. So what we're doing here is that we're importing this library called math, and we're using it to calculate the area of a circle using a function. All right, so let's say Python 3 again, and let's copy all of this in there. All right, now we can run this function and define whatever radius we want. So let's run this function with a radius of 10, for example, and then it will calculate for me 314. This is the area of a circle with a radius of 10. What have we done here? We've imported a library that helped us to calculate. So libraries are like helpers. Think of libraries as helpers. They help you. Otherwise, you could still do this thing yourself. You could ask ChatGPT, what is the value of pi? What is the value of pi? The value of pi is an indefinite number, but you can use math.pi. But I want to know the actual value of pi. All right, so this value of pi is this over there. All right, so let's define pi, and let's not use math. Let's just say pi is equals to this number, right? And then instead of using the library, we're just going to use pi like that, right? And then we've now defined pi ourselves, and then the area is pi.radius 2, and then we return the area. All right, so let's do the same thing there, right? And then let's run the same whatever we did before. Calculate the area of a circle with a radius of 10. You see the number is 314152. Is exactly the same number. All right, you can even, because we have imported math over here, you can even do math.pi over there and see what it gives you for pi. It gives you that, and you can use that in future. You can use that, right? But why would you want to do that? How are you going to always remember what pi is? It's just simpler to say, oh no, let me import math, and then math will tell me what pi is. Let's see what other functions, functions does math library have? All right. What other functions that math library has? There you go. It has a lot of other things. You know, for example, square root. You can use math to calculate the square root. You can use the log, the sin, the tan, the radians, the degrees. There's a lot of things, all right? I'm not going to cover all of it. I'm just showing you how to use ChatGPT. You can figure these things out. You can ask it and it can show you. Now you can learn how to code with ChatGPT. I mean, we can start asking, is ChatGPT going to replace, you know, online teachers like ourselves? I don't know, right? Maybe you still need someone to explain this to you and what it's doing, or you need to ask the right questions to ChatGPT. How will you know the right questions? Now, you can see all the other functions. You can play around with them and you can see what they're doing. But what I'm trying to show you here is the idea of a library and how a library can simplify your coding going on, that instead of now having to remember what pi is or how to calculate a square root, you can now use a library to do that. Okay, so now we're gonna stop this and then we're gonna say, okay, cool. So let's take it as a notch up. You know, show me a function with a library I need to install with pip. All right. Okay, here's a good one, requests. There you go. Now, this kind of thing, okay, no, use a different request call that does not need an API key. All right, there you go. You might wonder what I'm talking about here, but you know, if you come across something like this is why you need a teacher. All right, so I don't think ChatGPT will replace teachers anytime soon. This function, I could quickly glance through it and realize I'm not going to be able to run it. I don't have an API key for this and I'm not going to go get it. Okay, so I asked it to just give me a different function, all right, which does not require me to have an API key. So now we have, you saw over there how we were able to import math. We're able to go in here and just do something like import math. Right now, if we want to run this function, we need to import requests, right? So if you try and say import requests like that, oh, it was able to import requests. So yeah, it might be already exit. It requests let me just try and run this. Let me run this because it requests, it shouldn't be able to import requests. Let's define the URL. Okay, let's define this URL. Let's see what's going on here. URL is equals to that. All right, and then import requests. All right, import requests. And then let's get the URL. Your responses request.get the URL. And let's do response.txt. All right, let's try this. So we've imported requests. Let's then run the next line of the URL. Let's try and get the URL. Okay, then say let's get response request get URL. Oh, it ran this. This is, or I might have okay, there you go. Yeah, no, I might have okay, so I'm going to clear this. So this actually works, but I might have what am I trying to say? I might have installed requests already somewhere globally on this machine because it's an old machine. So it's very likely that would have happened. But generally, when there are libraries like requests, and there'll be many other more. Most of the libraries you're going to work with are going to be exactly like requests. They don't come pre-installed inside of Python. So if you look at math, when we worked with math, we could just say import math, and we didn't have an import error, right? So I'm gonna try another example. Another example, not using requests. Let's try and get another example, not using requests. No, but random is pre-installed. An example of a library I need to install, not requests. All right, because random I think is already there. NumPy SNP, that's a good one. Yes, let's look at this one. So let's come in here and do Python, right? Python 3, right? And let's try and say import NumPy as NP. There you go. Module not found error. This is the error that you get when you try to import a function that is not pre-installed inside of Python. All right, it doesn't come with Python because there's only so much space. There's only so much libraries that that can be pre-installed with the installation. And what is a library, by the way? A library is just helper functions. It's helper functions like what I showed you earlier on when you're looking for pi. It already just tells you what pi is without you having to remember what. But a helper function is just another function. So in reality, it's not some very complex high level. I used to think libraries were like some programs. They're just lines of code that someone has already pre-written for you, so that when you now write your own code, you can just plug in their lines of code without rewriting those lines, because they are repetitive code. You would have rewritten them in the exact same way. So if you want to go and request, for example, you want to go and scrape the internet. Request is used mostly for that, for scraping the internet. You want to get data from this URL, for example, right? And you would have to write a lot of, you know, lines of codes to go and get this and do this and that. And it will be the same lines of code for the next person who wants to scrap another URL. It will be the exact same of code for another person with a third URL and a fourth URL and a fifth URL. It's exactly the same lines of code to go and scrap that URL. So instead of everybody rewriting that code from scratch, somebody said, oh, cool, I'm going to write a library called request. And that library, we are just going to write for you. If you gave it a URL, it's going to just go and scrap it for you. And then now all you need to do is to import that library and just call the get function of the library, the post function of the library, whatever the function that you need, so you don't have to rewrite that whole function from scratch. That is all a library does. It's not more complicated than that. So now all I needed to do was to say request get URL. I'm going to ask ChatGPT to try and see if it can demonstrate you. If I had to write code to get content from a URL without using the request library, you know, how would that function look? Okay, so this one is showing you URL lib request. So I think this one is you can use a Python built-in URL lib function. Okay, so this is a built-in function inside of Python which I would not need to install requests. Okay, but what if I didn't use a library? Okay, what if I did not use any library at all? Is that possible? There you go. Okay, it is possible to make HTTP requests without using an external library in Python, but it requires more low-level socket programming. Here's an example of a function that uses the built-in socket module. Can you look at all of, so this is another way of doing it without using an external library, but it's going to get you the same results, right? So imagine everybody, every programmer, every time they need to scrap a website, they were going to write all of these lines of code using sockets. I mean, your code is going to become clumsy. And instead of doing all of these lines of code, or even this is even more lines of code than the request library. This is better. It's a built-in function library, but it's got definitely less lines than request. But request has only one line. Request, it's basically request get URL. Do you understand how we have simplified doing it the old-fashioned socket way to even the old-fashioned internal URL lib way to the simplest way of just one line of code to get stuff from that URL. This is why we use libraries. I'm trying to demonstrate to you why we use libraries and why Python is so cool, because there are so many libraries for almost anything you can imagine, from data science to web scraping to anything you would need to use Python code for. All right, and we are going to work with OpenAI API, and obviously it also has its own library as well, and I'll show you when we're installing that library over there. So now this is why we use libraries, right? Now I need to now explain why we need to use virtual environments, because technically what I can do over here, if I exit from here, this is now becoming long, and I didn't want this to become long, but you know, these are real basics. Now what I could do is say pip install requests, right? But if I do this, it's going to install requests in my entire machine. And remember what I told you when you got started, why Python still has Python 2.7 and Python 3, why you have two versions of Python in the same machine, right? Remember this? Because over time the syntax changes, but the libraries always change. If you go and look at requests, the requests now, there's a version of requests we're using. There's another version that was being used last year. There's lots and lots of versions of requests, all the way to 10 years ago. You can still say, if you installed requests 10 years ago, it's not the same request you will install today, because there are versions. Every time they improve the stuff. When the Python 3 comes out, the syntax has changed. They have to improve the library. This is what we call maintenance of the library. This is why it's very important to not just use any library on the internet. There are many libraries for many, many things, but you need to understand common libraries and libraries which are being maintained by their developers, right? Because every time the Python changes, the library needs to be updated and improved with the new syntax of the new Python. But also every time things improve, sometimes, you know, with scrapping, maybe even websites change and things like that, and now, you know, the way the website looks is different, and now you need to update the request library to now be able to scrap the new website. So the point is, code is always getting updated, so libraries are always getting updated. Even though in your mind, when you look at this, you only see pip install requests, in the background it goes and installs the latest version of request. It's not going to be the same request you installed last year or 2 years ago. Now, if we just install requests globally and we have a project that we built this year, and then next year request changes, and then I need to now write a new project, and I just do pip install requests, it's going to upgrade the request for the entire machine. Now my old project, which was built with the requests from 2 years ago, is gonna break. You understand? Because now I've reinstalled requests because I'm doing a new project. Maybe the new project requires the latest version of requests, right? The best way to describe it is with OpenAI code. Actually, this is the most practical way for me to show you this. All right, OpenAI documentation, because I'm teaching you this so you can start using OpenAI stuff, right? So let me use this as an example. OpenAI has got its own library called OpenAI. To use any of the stuff inside of OpenAI, you have to start by pip install OpenAI, the same way I'm going to show you pip install requests. But OpenAI is constantly changing. So if you think about it, last year this time there was no ChatGPT. Last year this time there was only GPT-3. There wasn't even GPT 3.5 Turbo. So if I installed pip install OpenAI last year, I could run all the functions that were there on OpenAI last year. This year, if I've got a machine where I've installed pip last year, and I go there and I now want to run the latest chat 3.5 Turbo function on it, and I just write it, it's not going to work. It's going to not recognize the 3.5 Turbo, because 3.5 Turbo was actually just released December or early this year on the API, which means I need to pip install OpenAI again, the latest version that now has the latest 3.5 Turbo in it. But if I now install the 3.5 Turbo, the new one, the old OpenAI that I worked with might break because it was using a different version of maybe 3, that now has changed in the new one. You understand? So even though I'm installing pip install OpenAI, it's not the same OpenAI. It's a different version. There's many versions every time when they update the library. So now it means those 2 projects will not be able to run on the same machine, because I'll have to decide which version of OpenAI, because the old version, the project is going to continue running with the old version just fine. A version is just lines of code. It's just a library which worked fine with everything that it was built on when it was built last year. Now I'm installing a new version, which the old project won't run with the new version anymore. But the new project cannot run with the old one, with the old version. But I need to run both these projects on the same machine. What do? I need to separate the environment of the old project and the new project. So So as a matter of good practice, every time you create a new Python project, you need to create its own environment. So you might install pip 100 times in the same machine on different environments, because the projects might be using different versions of your installed libraries. So when it comes to Python and libraries, the version is very, very important, right? This is why we do virtual servers. This is why I would not program shit in my own machine, because the virtual server itself takes a whole lot of space. And if I had to do it for every project, I would run out of space, because each and every single project needs its own virtual environment. This is why we have virtual environments. Do you understand? If I use a request, the OpenAI is probably the best example to use, because it changes so much. Next month, they're going to introduce live web search and all of these things, which is not currently on the API, which means they're even busy updating the API now, which means there'll be a different version of the API that will be introduced the month from now. And they are always introducing a different version of the API. So every time you install it, you're installing the latest version. You understand? So you'll get the project to work with the latest version, but 3 years from now, it's no longer the latest version. And you don't want to keep updating your project every time they update a version. You won't have the time. So you need to keep working with the version that worked when you built the project, and that's the version that must continue working on that machine. This is why even later on we'll get into things like Docker, because when you think about Docker, we're now talking about versioning on an entire microservice level, where you want to be able to take a project from building it on Mac to building it on Linux or on any other machine, and it will never break, because it has kept everything inside of this nice Docker environment, where you've kept the version the way you want it, and you have built your entire universe in one place, and you want to be able to move the universe anywhere without having the code break. Because what normally happens is I could build code on Mac, even though I've kept the pip versions the same, but if I take that code from Mac and I want to run it in a Linux machine, it breaks, because Linux machine has got a different infrastructure. So when you come to Docker, it's like taking the entire idea of a virtual environment to a higher scale, where we create an entire environment around a whole machine, an entire operating system environment, where we can move that environment anyway, and the code will always work, because the environment is the same. You understand? But that is for another day, not for today. For today, just understand, think of a virtual environment like it is exactly an environment. It's like a temperature. If this plant always grows under this right temperature, right? In South Africa, where the temperature is 23 degrees Celsius, this is the perfect environment for this tree to grow, right? If I now move to Australia, right, and now the weather there is completely different, and I want to plant the same tree in Australia, it doesn't grow anymore. The environment in Australia is different. Even though I can take the exact same tree to Australia, it won't grow, because in Australia it's a bit more dry, windy, whatever. It needs a different environment. But imagine I could encase my tree inside of a box where I could maintain the temperature and the humidity exactly the same, so that I can move to Australia and move my tree with the whole box with it. And the tree will continue to grow even in Australia, because I've moved the environment with me. You understand? Think about it that way, right? So when we run code, it needs to sit inside of an environment, and we take the environment with us, because code is like that very fragile tree that if you put it in a different environment, it's going to break because the environment is different. So think about it that way. So now that I've explained virtual environments to you, when we start working with code that requires environment, we need to install an environment, okay? So I'm not gonna, you can even just ask ChatGPT how to do this, okay? Right? Because I'm trying to show you how to code with ChatGPT. But I've got my own way, and I've got it in my video. I'd like to show you, you can go and watch, there's a video on setting up your virtual server. And in there, I explain to you how to install a virtual environment. If you want to ask ChatGPT, you can, but ChatGPT doesn't know the environment you're in right now, all right? Or maybe let's try. I am in a Linux machine with Python 3, How can I install virtual environment to start running Python projects? Okay, I'm in a Linux machine. Okay, Ubuntu 20 something, right? 0.04. Let's be very specific. I'm in a Linux machine, Ubuntu 20 with Python 3 pre-installed. How can I install a virtual environment to start running Python projects? Okay. Yeah, there you go. It showed you exactly how to do it. So sudo apt-get install virtual env, and then you can say virtual env, whatever your env. This is exactly how, this is the right way to do it. This is actually correct, right? So if you're there in the virtual server, you can then go run this command, all right? So you just copy it and you run it like that. I'm not gonna do it because I've already installed virtual environment in my machine. But if you did it, it'll install the virtual environment. But what I want to do in here is actually to create the environment, okay? So to create the environment is virtual env. So I want to create it in this location. So virtual env, my env, I'm just going to create it like that. And then it has created it, right? So if I click ls, you'll see there's a thing called my env in there. You can call this anything. What I like to call it is, instead of calling it my env, I like to call it coding env according to the name of the project, okay? So, but I've already called it my env. You can call it anything you want. So you could say virtual env, coding env, but always get into the habit of naming your virtual environment ending with the words env at the end, because the virtual environment is just a folder. So if I say ls in here and I cd in here, it's just a folder. You understand? It's just a folder with another folder inside, but there's a specific structure for an environment folder, right? For env. So if you don't call it, if you rename it if you name it in a different way, you might end up forgetting later on which one was the environment and which one was the normal folder, because it's just a folder, right? So every time you create an environment, whatever you want to call it, you could call it coding env, my env, project env, whatever, but get into the habit of putting the words env at the end of the environment so that you can differentiate between folders and environment folders, right? So after you've done that, then you can activate that environment and say source activate the environment. No, in here. So what it does is that source, it calls the environment, and then you just say bin activate. And then after you've done that, then you see your environment over there, it's activated, right? So you can clear now, and now we can run any lines of code in here inside of our environment. So now if we install requests in here, right? If we now say pip install requests, it's going to install requests in our current environment. It's going to install the latest version of request, and at the end it will show you which version of request it installed. Let's just have a look here. Request downloaded request 2.3.0. You know, if you pay attention and you look over there, it will show you which version of request is installed. All right, and then what I want to do now, I want to also install OpenAI, because that's why we're doing what we're doing here, so that we can eventually code OpenAI. But I'm teaching you the basics to get to, you know, coding proper OpenAI. So let's install OpenAI. It requires a request. Some libraries, when you install them, require other libraries to run, and then they will reinstall those libraries in the background for you. But you don't have to worry about that. You just install everything you do. Now, after you've installed your libraries, it's always a good practice to keep what we call a requirements.txt file. Okay, requirements.txt file. What is a requirement.txt file? It's basically a text file with a list of all the libraries that have been installed inside of your environment. So that when I now move this project to another place, especially when I put my code in GitHub or other places so people can replicate my code, they need to know which versions of libraries I've installed. Because if I put my code as it is on GitHub and you get that code 3 years from now, right, and you decide to, oh no, you know what, I'm gonna go and copy this code and I'm going to go and just, oh, they're using requests, okay, let me install requests. Oh, they're using OpenAI, let me install OpenAI. Oh, they're using LLMA index, oh, let me install that. And then the code doesn't run without you having done anything wrong, because it's now installing different versions of that library, not the versions that were in their code when the code was built. So as a developer, it's always good practice when you develop code, you always create a requirements.txt file after you've installed all your libraries, so you can put the versions of your library in there. And I came across this today when I was doing LLMA index. I was doing a project on LLMA index, right? So let me actually install this as well, because this is also a constantly changing library. Like, I installed it 2 weeks back and I installed it today and it's different. They've already renamed half of the things in there, right? So if you used my code from 2 weeks ago, and somebody comes and finds my code there and they copy and paste the code exactly, it's not going to work anymore, because they've renamed entire functions in the LLMA index. So it's important that when you then download my code from 2 weeks ago, you saw which version of LLMA index I was working with. But I didn't do a requirements.txt file, so you wouldn't know. So I'm sorry for that. If you come across this is normally the biggest problem when people go and watch my videos from 2-3 years ago and immediately they get an error. One of the biggest causes for that is libraries and versioning, because code that was working just fine is no longer working, right? So let me just do, yeah, there you go, pip install LLMA index. I'm going to install this as well, so I can show you what I mean by the versioning, because we're going to use this also in our coding. So let's install this LLMA index. It installs a lot of things, TikTok and dish, make sure it has OpenAI, blah, 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 dish, okay. Requests, it needs a different version of requests, so let's see. It found 2.3.0, uninstall 2.3.0, because maybe it needs a different version of requests. I don't know. Let's just leave it. Now that I've done all of that, let's go back to, using our ChatGPT to help us code. So how do I create my requirements.txt file? All right, there you go. This is so cool. Like, ChatGPT is really so cool for coding. I don't know that you knew that you could use ChatGPT as your coding assistant. ChatGPT is not just a blog writing tool. I think people are completely underestimating and undervaluing ChatGPT as a blog writing tool. I can't believe people complain about paying $20 a month. Do you know how much you have to pay to go learn coding from university? Do you know how much you have to pay for all of these things? And you've got ChatGPT, you could just ask it. You could just ask it exactly what you need to know about something very specific. And people complain about paying $20 a month. People are ridiculous. People are completely ridiculous. So there you go. This is what we've already done to activate the env. Remember, we've already done that path to env bin activate. What this code does is just exactly what we did. We activated our env, and then you just do pip freeze requirements.txt. That's all you do. All right, so let's do that. Pip freeze requirements.txt, and then if we list our thing, you can see now there's a new file called requirements.txt. Okay, so if we nano and we open that file, you can see it already show. You can see there's a lot of stuff in here that's already been installed, and different versions of it. And I only installed LLMA index, OpenAI, and requests. But these things, they require other things to run. So LLMA index requires, tick token. It requires certain versions of OpenAI. It requires NumPy. It requires requests and specific versions of everything. And over here in your requirements.txt file, this is where you now see the versions that are on the application. So when you export this code and you want to now hand over this code to another developer, you need to give them a requirements.txt file, because all they'll do is over here it even shows you how to pip install -r requirements.txt. So if I put this code on GitHub, right, and I had a requirements.txt file, all you would need to do is to run this pip install -r requirements.txt. It will install the exact versions in your requirements.txt file. If you have a big project, sometimes there's a clash, it happens. Actually, there's usually almost always a clash with certain versions, and you just go through and resolve your clashes, but you would be okay, right? So this is very, very important. This is the basics of understanding virtual environments. I'm going very, very quickly from hello world to actual programming, right? Because I want to show you again, I'm going to repeat myself, the basics of understanding what it is we are doing here, so that when you go through my code, you are not confused and you see things that you see me working in a virtual environment, you see me activating a virtual environment, like what's going on. This is what's going on. This is a basics video. So now we have done the requirements.txt, we are good to go. Now we can actually, like, if I clear this, right, we can actually start running, importing OpenAI, importing OpenLLMA index, and start running functions that are working with OpenAI and run them inside of our virtual environment. Always make sure your virtual environment is active when you are running those lines of code, okay? So let's go back. So now we've covered this virtual environments. We've covered lines of code. We've covered Python functions. We're going to go into simple web applications, and then classes and models and complex web application. Simple web application, I think this is where I'm going to end up now today, because let's do a simple function, right? I've shown you a simple function over there that uses requests. I've shown another simple function that uses A plus B. Functioning basically works exactly the same. So if you go to OpenAI API, right? Let's look for a function like, let's look at a completion, right? A completion function. And let's use that. Python, let's copy this. Okay. All right. So we started by importing OS. OS is a library that comes pre-installed with Python. All right. Our OpenAI, the API key, we're gonna put our API key here. Okay, I'm gonna get an API key and then I will put it in there. And then we're gonna pick the model that we're working with, and then we're gonna just have a prompt. And then we're going to define the maximum tokens. Actually, let's not define the maximum tokens and the temperature. Let's just leave that undefined. Okay. All right. So what are we doing here? We're importing OS. We're importing the OpenAI library. We are initiating our library with the OpenAI API key. So enter your key here. Right, and then after that we get a response, right, and then we run this function. So based on everything I've taught you, how do you rewrite this function to be inside of a, let's just leave the max tokens and the temperature. Because it's going to help me define something, show you something else. How do you rewrite this function from, remember what I showed you, lines of code to functions? How to upgrade from, this is a line of code, but how do we upgrade from a line of code to a function? right? So remember, we start by defining a function. We start by defining a function and you give it a name. So we're gonna call this function text completion. And then you have to define what must go into this function. So we definitely need to input a prompt into this function, right? So let's call this prompt and say we're going to input a prompt into the function. What else do we need to specify? Max tokens. So we're going to input the max tokens into the function. The temperature. So we need to define the temperature. So we're going to input the temperature into the function. You understand? And then we're going to run the function like that. So now we can give this thing even a variable, right? It's called, say, rs is equals to that. Is a completion. We have our model. We have our prompt. We have our max tokens. We have our temperature, and so forth. So now what we've done now is we have gone from lines of code to functions. Now we can just call this function like we did before with the a plus b function. This is exactly the same principle with the a plus b function, but define these variables that go into the function to get our answer. But we need our function to output something. We want it to output the results, right? So what does the response look like? So this is apparently what the response looks like. So let's copy it here and paste it over there. I don't know if they've written for us a way to pass this response. They haven't, so we're going to have to figure it out. So this is the text. This is going to be where the answer is sitting. So we're going to need to pass this. This is another thing. This is what we call like, you know, when you're working with APIs, an API is a programming interface. So I've written code inside of my machine, and I'm going to send these instructions into OpenAI so that OpenAI needs to understand what it is I'm sending the instruction to them for. So we need to have a common language of programming. OpenAI could be programming in Rust, Python, JavaScript, doesn't matter. I could be programming in Python, JavaScript, anything. Our programming languages do not need to be the same. The programming interface, which is the API, needs to be standard between my language and your language. So one of the ways to communicate between most applications within an API is using JSON. You can use JSON, you can use text, there's even strings, there's many ways of communicating within an API, but the most common one is JSON, okay? So let's ask OpenAI, what is JSON and what does it stand for, okay? What is JSON and what does it stand for? All right. JSON stands for, there you go. So if you don't understand JSON, JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation, okay? I'm not going to confuse you, but it is really like, it's just a language. It's a way of us organizing data so that we can understand what we're talking about. So let's say I want to write a letter to OpenAI and I want to tell OpenAI, okay, I want you to please do a completion for me. But the completion that I want is, I want you to use the model called Text Da Vinci, and then I want you to use this prompt called this and that. I could write it in a letter. I could write like a Word document and send it to OpenAI, and then they give me a response, right? I could write them an email and they'll give me a response. Someone else can write an email and we'll use different wording. Someone else will write an email and use different wording. So all of us, let's say there's 100 of us, and we all want to send this request to OpenAI so that we can use their model. And we are all going to write things in our own different programming languages. So OpenAI said, whoa, I'm going to give you a standardized method of how you must send your request to me. And this is how this works. But then when they give us the response, they also give us the response in a very standardized way. Every time the response from OpenAI is always going to come like this, so that we can know what it looks like. And the most common ways of response structure is JSON. So this JSON object now is always going to look like this. And it's like, you know, think about it like a table with a title, name, first name Bertha, last name this and that, surname this and that. So this is what a JSON is. It's like a key pair, they call them like a key pair structure or keep a sort of like organization, so that you can have like a title or a name of a variable and then the value of that variable. So the name of this variable is called an object, and then the value of that object is text completion. The name here is called created, and then the value is the timestamp of when it was created. The name is the model, and this is the name of the model that was used. These are the choices. The choices is a list. Here, this is a square bracket. This is a list, and inside that list there's another object with the same value pairs and so forth. Okay, so a JSON programming language, you can even use OpenAI to help you understand JSON programming languages. The way I'm asking it questions, when you go through this and you're like, oh, so what does this mean? You can go and ask it. So ask it, but why do you have this? Why do we have these things, you know, and these things in the same JSON, for example? Why do we have this and why do we have that? So then it will go and explain what this is. So this is, then it will explain, okay, this is an array. Oh, this is a curly braces is an object. This is square braces is an array. It will explain it to you so you can understand, oh, okay. So now I'm going to give it this, and I'm going to say, can you write me a Python function to pass? Okay, let me just find a way to write it. Okay, given the JSON below, I want to output the, let's see, let me paste it back here so I can see. I want to output the text. I want to output the text variable from the object. How can I parse this JSON object in Python to get text variable value? And then I paste that JSON object. So let's ask ChatGPT if I have this JSON data like that. Okay. And then first of all, it says I must, because this is a string, okay, because this looks like a string, but it actually is not a string. It thinks it's a string, but it's not. But so it's doing a JSON loads the data, all right, assuming this was the data and this was the string, but it's not a string. It's fine. So we can skip the JSON.load and just assume that data is equals to this object. And then what we need to do is to say data choices at 0 text. That's how we get the text. So basically what we need to do is to, this is the function we need. So the text is equals to the data, but the data obviously is what's going to come from here, which is the response. So this is going to be equals to the response choices at 0.text. And then that's what we want to return. Okay, so I'm not going to run this because I'm running out of time, and this video is already way longer than I wanted it to be. But I've now upgraded you from simple hello world to understanding functions and variables, to understanding how you go from lines of text. Like if you come across many APIs are written like this, right? But it's difficult to always now take this API and now put it inside of a working application. The very first step to doing that is to put it inside of a function. And so I've shown you exactly how to now even take this and write a function that does that. You can even copy this the way that it is, and let's try this, maybe a simpler way. Okay, how can I convert this following code to a def function in Python that will take in the prompt as an argument and output the text response? Oh no, I didn't. Oh, it figured it out. Let me copy this. It figured it out without even me, because that's what we were talking about. So this is what I wrote. Let me show you what ChatGPT wrote. So let me just push what I wrote at the bottom, because I don't want to lose it. Because I think ChatGPT wrote better code than me. Can you believe it? So you import JSON, you import OpenAI, then you put in your API key like that, and then you write the function generate text prompt. This is the model, this is the max tokens, this is the temperature 0.5. Then you say response is equals to OpenAI complete. Model engine is this engine that you defined. The prompt is a prompt. The tokens, the temperature is the temperature. Then the choices is equals to response choices. The text is choices text or strip, and then return the text. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. This is actually better than I would have written the function. So guys, use ChatGPT to code. Guys, use ChatGPT to code. If you go through my tutorials, you can always check them through ChatGPT, because this is actually way better than I would have written it. Actually, I would have scrapped what I wrote and I would have stick to what ChatGPT wrote, because this is actually a better way of writing it. What I like about it, I'll tell you what I like about this that I don't have, right? Instead of entering everything there, it's defining some of them inside of the variables, because I told it I only want to input the prompt. If I could have updated that and inputted something else, it would have, done something different. Okay. And then after that, you then do the temperature. You could have, inputted the temperature in there as well, but this is exactly how I wrote the function. But I like the way it did the response or choice, because I was going to pass it in a different way, but it passed it way better. Response choices, and choices text strip, and return text. This is perfect. This is actually better than I wrote this. So you wanna test this? You wanna test this? Let me see if I wanna test this. I don't wanna test this because I don't want to put in my API key and it's gonna take me forever. But anyway, you can test this at home. All right, and all you need to do is to run this function, this at the bottom. So you would then define the prompt, once upon a time. All right, generate text is that, and then use it with the prompt. Okay, yeah. But let me actually run this. I'm curious. So let me go into my API keys over there. Let me generate a new key, which I will delete after this. Okay, to delete. Okay. Let me copy it. So don't worry about it. By the time this video goes live, I would have deleted this key. So let me put it in there. All right. Let's save this. All right. Let's actually not do that. Let's just save all of this, and let's say nano main.py. All right, and let's paste this in there. All right, and then let's close this. So now I'm teaching you now how to run functions inside of files, right? Because you can actually do that. So we can say Python like that, and then we get a Python shell. So instead of rewriting this function inside of the shell, we've put it inside of a file. Okay, so we can just say import. Can you say import? What's the let's see, from .main import. Let's try this. From main import. Yeah, there you go. That's how you do it. From main import, sometimes I forget, there's different ways of importing depending on where you are and the relative, whatever. So from main import, what has happened here is that I've imported these functions over here. Okay. For me to prove this to you is I can actually like run this in the command line, OpenAI API key like that, and you can see the keys there. And this is coming from this main file. All right. So let's define a prompt. Let's use the once upon a time prompt that they're recommending. Once upon single quotes, and then let's run this with once upon a time. Where were we? Okay, generate text with that prompt. And let's write text. There you go. Once upon a time, there was a little girl who loved to play with her dolls. One day she found a magic lamp. And so this works perfectly. So now I've taken you from zero to being able to use the OpenAI API. Even if you didn't know how to use Python, you should have at least gone through the steps and the basics of this, okay? So let's exit out of this. Let me clear that. Let me delete that. Actually, I can even leave it. It doesn't matter. I'm just going to delete my key over there. Revoke key. So that key is gone. And if I go over here and I try the same thing again, and I say from main import. All right, and then I define the prompt once upon a time. All right, and I try to run this. It should give me an error because my API key has been revoked. Okay. Oh, because I have not pushed the changes yet. Okay, but it's fine. By the time I upload these videos, I would have revoked this key. Okay, so anyway guys, thank you for watching, and I think this is getting a little bit too long. What we'll do next week is, now we need to go into simple web application, classes and models, and complex web application. So now you understand at least how to write the function on a command line, but this is just a function on a command line. This is not an application. So what you want to do is you want to take a function on a command line and put it inside of an application. I've already done this before in the channel, and you can go watch it, but I'm now doing it from a teaching point of view, from now a step-by-step teaching, right? So it will be way more involved as this video was for beginners especially. So if you're not a beginner, you might find this a little bit boring. And then after that, then I will be building up the complexity as I did in this video, where, and I'll show you, okay, now this is simple web application. Now how do we go into a more complex? How do we start introducing classes and models, databases, so that we can now start to have storing data and you know, authentication and things like that, to build an application that you can actually even, you know, charge people for. All right, so thank you guys for watching. We'll continue with the rest of the video next week.